Hello and welcome to the Scotland Rugby News podcast with me, your host, Bruce Aitchison from Happiness Egg Shaped, and my pal, the man with awards, the one and the only Gavin Harper. Hello, sir. Middle of the week, blue sky, sunshine. Getting tired of saying that. It's just the standard now.
It's absolutely incredible. 2 weeks running, we've been sat here basking in the, well, not quite, in the sun. It's just a bizarre occurrence.
How exciting is it though to be going to rugby and going to events knowing that you're actually going to be able to see people's faces and, you know, short sleep. Like I just love it. I can't understand why you wouldn't want this to be when it's happening all year round. It's easier to make hard pitches in the summer soft than it is in the winter. But that's a whole one of those other ones that gee whiz, we're going to be doing pods till about the year 3026.
Yeah,
but we'll get there.
Like, you're spot on. Like, how good would it be if this was what we were used to all the time? I mean, like that's never going to happen here, but like it would be amazing if we could get out in this and watch a bit more rugby in this more often.
Yeah, skills, everything. Anyway, quick word from our sponsor. Scotland Rugby News is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV after this. Not quite right now. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search today and see if you can find the one for you. So let's start in Glasgow. Interesting one. You know, the Bulls, they've been away for a long time. We were talking last week. I thought Glasgow would do it because of the way the Bulls were against Edinburgh, but they've got so many players in that Bulls squad. It's the psychology, isn't it? Like, how can they play at Edinburgh, not really turn up for probably 55 minutes and then almost win it, but then they go along the road and play Glasgow and, you know, beat who are in the league table, a better team than Edinburgh?
I think a lot of it was clearly that psychology of the Jake White attempted badly to play it down that there was no revenge on their minds from the URC final. Like, clearly that was not the case. Clearly revenge would have been a factor. They were pretty open in saying that they'd had the trip to Scotstoun kind of circled on the calendar from the minute the fixtures came out. So they obviously had a point to prove. I think as we keep talking about, I don't want to labour the point, but Glasgow are desperate for a few back. And I think that probably showed. I think they'll look a better team, a more kind of complete team with Sione and Hugh Jones, obviously. I think Scott Cummings, it's going to take a guy who's missed 3-4 months to some time to get kind of back up and running. But, gee, I mean, like they lost more on Friday night. You know, Jack Mann went off. It didn't look great.
All the pictures for the award ceremony, he's got his arm in a sling. Yeah,
Patrick Schickerling hurt his foot pretty early on and managed to play on till just after half time, and then he succumbed to that. And Gregor Brown had a knee injury. So you think, well, just as some guys are coming back, can Glasgow get through unscathed? And I think I said last week, you know, if Glasgow had taken a couple of points, you'd say, well, actually, maybe okay. But then they've got more injuries. Yes, they managed to get a bonus point right at the end, but the sort of 75 minutes before that, I think, will have been a bit of a concern. Franco tried to play it down, but I do think it'll be a bit of a worry.
You look at that back line, and, you know, we had this earlier in the season where the front eight were, I think there was maybe only Johnny Matthews was a first choice.
Yeah.
And the back line was intact, but that back line is still full internationals. Horn, Jordan, Rowe, McDowell, Stein, Canceres, you know, been outstanding for Glasgow without being a Scotland international. Obviously, Ollie Smith on his way back. So it's still decent depth, and you've got Dobie and Hastings on the bench. It's amazing to think we're talking, you know, you got to throw in Sione and Hugh Jones to make that better. Kyle then probably comes onto the wing, and you're looking at a very strong backline with 3 subs rather than just 2. So two players in that back line can make a big difference. But really, it's up front, especially against a team like the Bulls, that, you know, Jake White just loves my pack's bigger than your pack, doesn't he?
Yeah, totally. And I think, you know, he talked a wee bit, Jake White, about the team selection, and he picked basically 4 giants, two in the second row and 2 on the flanks, and Glasgow couldn't get over the gain line. I think, you know, Stafford and Sione is probably the prime example of Stafford's a very good player, but Sione's probably at that next sort of bracket of potentially world class. And I think that's the difference when you're into games like this that are, you know, could be knockout games or could be finals and all that kind of stuff. Like that team you mentioned, the Glasgow team that played at the weekend, is still a very good team. It would beat a lot of teams in the URC.
Yeah.
But when you get into that kind of shootout against other final kind of candidates, I think that's when you want to be full strength, and guys like, you know, Sione and Hugo make a big difference. But you're right, like that, it feels like obviously losing Xander's a blow. Losing, you know, both Fagersons, to not have either of them or Dempsey, there's a lot of heavy lifting there for others to do. And when you then think, well, Scott Cummings and Max Williamson are just on their way back, and Vailanu and JP Dupree are being asked to play a lot of rugby, having had a long time out. It's it's a tough kind of mix, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks they'll get some good news, and they've got 2 games before the playoffs. So yeah, I think if they can get a couple of bodies back before then, that'll be a good thing.
It's good they're getting a rest this week. You know, we want them to be in the later stages of Europe, but to get players back, you look at both squads, Edinburgh and Glasgow, the number of players injured. I was listening to some pundits talking about Liverpool and how they've been able to sustain a consistent level of performance because they've kept their players fit. They've obviously suffered injuries, and it would take somebody with far more knowledge and time and energy to look at it. But the number of injuries is massively concerning. You know, the game is ridiculous. A lot of the injuries are things that have happened through the body-on-body contact. There's not many pulling up with hamstrings or ankles from running or changing direction. These are mostly contact injuries, which I suppose in some respects are maybe unavoidable, but it is a massive concern that we're suffering so many injuries.
It is, and I think we asked Nigel Carolan at Glasgow about this a couple of weeks ago, and he basically said they had looked at it and they have considered whether there was anything in the way they were training and the way that they were kind of preparing that was leading to these. But as you say, so many of them are kind of, you know, I think Franco, when Sione injured himself, described it as a freak injury, and I think that's it. Like, you're asking these guys now to play so many games. I think there are going to be a kind of pile up of injuries, and you look at the guys who are hurt currently. Duhan, from an Edinburgh point of view, and then Xander and his brother, you know, Sione, they play an awful lot of games. If they're available, generally they're in the team. And yeah, I just think sometimes these things are unavoidable. But look, I do think it's a concern, especially when you think that, you know, Franco has said that the pro team's Glasgow squad will shrink in size this summer. So, you know, you're going to end up with gaps, and you're then going to have to find players to fill those. And where do they come from? Yeah,
looking at league table, Leinster are going to finish top. Do you think, you know, Glasgow and the Bulls are pretty tight? Sharks are coming. I'm not sure Sharks or Bulls are overly concerned with. I think they just need to be top 4. I can't imagine they're overly concerned with they finish second or fourth. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I think the Bulls are coming for Glasgow. Do you think Glasgow can hold on for second?
I think it's going to be tough now. I think, well, what we do know is they probably need 10 points. They definitely, I think, need 2 wins. And when you consider that Glasgow's last game of the regular season is against Leinster in the Aviva, that looks a bit of an ominous prospect. I think the good news from a Glasgow point of view would be if Leinster win this weekend, they'd be in the Champions Cup final, and they might just wrap a few in cotton wool. And Glasgow would be doing the opposite, hoping that the likes of Sione, Jack Dempsey, Hugh Jones, if they are back, can actually get a couple of games. And that would be a bit of a, I know it would be Leinster, B, C, whatever. But I think that would be a bit of a psychological boost for Glasgow. But it's tough because I just think the Bulls fixtures kind of coming up are both at home. So they've got Cardiff next, and then they play the Dragons. Realistically, you'd expect them to take 10 points. That being said, the Scarlets' result against Leinster was a total cat among the pigeons, so who knows? But I think it's going to be pretty tough for Glasgow to keep second, which means they'll be on the road if they get to the semi-finals, and means they're going to have to do it all over again.
I quite like the thought of Glasgow going to Leinster needing to win. I think this time last year, I was not sure they could go and do what they did. This year, I think I'm probably showing a bit more belief in, do you know what? I think if they had to go to Leinster to win, it would be quite interesting. Like you say, even if they've got a couple back, it would be a massive lift, and it just makes the depth of the squad more intense. I'm gutted for Jack Mann. I mean, after playing the way he's played, getting himself in, new contract announced, which would have been done however long ago. These things are not done on the day they're announced, but I just gutted for him. Don't know him, but he seems like a pretty impressive warrior, both Glasgow warrior and just the way he goes about things, warrior. It's an interesting. And Leinster, Europe, do they want to concede anything against Glasgow? Do you keep the kettle boiling and keep playing a really strong team, even if they rested 5 of their 15? They're still a test team.
Yeah, totally. And I think the other thing is you look at, I think they would have a week off after the Glasgow game. So, there's a week rest there anyway. Then they'll play a quarter-final, which is likely to probably not be a great stretch for them. So then you've got a fortnight off. Do you really need to rest guys against Glasgow? They've got their own injury worries. People like Tyke Furlong need games.
As a spectacle, Leinster playing a bundle of games on the bounce at the Aviva could be reasonably impressive. If they're able to. There's not many teams. The South African teams are not going to fill a stadium. There's very few teams there are going to fill a stadium the size of the Aviva playing something that's not a final.
Yeah, I think with the exception of the final, obviously the Bulls filled Loftus last year. So,
yeah.
But yeah, for a semi-final or a quarter-final, you would think. Although, do you know one thing I was really disappointed in when Glasgow were there in the Champions Cup was the crowd.
But Champions Cup, no season tickets, no business, no prior rights, none of that stuff. That was everybody buying a ticket.
Yeah, and I get that, and I get that they had like a week, and they had more time to market the Quins game, and maybe Quins are a more marketable.
Quins took a lot of people.
Yeah, and there was 80,000 or whatever it was, 70,000 at Croke Park, but like the Aviva when we were there felt empty, and that was the disappointment. But I think for a semi-final, you know, a potential South African team or a Munster or Glasgow or whoever, like I think they would get a pretty good crowd.
Yeah, I hope the Glasgow boys are enjoying their holidays. The pictures for the awards ceremony were class. George Horn just picking up more lumps of wood for Freddie Oakenblack. He looked sharp as well. He could be the shortest James Bond in history. Freya Walker getting players, a brilliant video of her. Her players player getting announced. It was a nice thing. It looked like a nice event. Ryan Wilson hosting always worries me, but he was looking sharp as well. I think this rest is needed. I think they need that mental switch off. It's been a tough old shift. That Bulls game looked pretty tough. I don't think they looked tired, but it almost felt like a fence too far for them to jump.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I think, you know, Franco's kind of always wants to manipulate these messages and stuff in the way that he does, but his message very much after the game and then at the awards on Saturday night was we're not disappointed to have lost to the Bulls. If there was one you were going to win, I think I know which one Franco would rather have won, but he was saying there's actually a lot that they can take from a game like that in the regular season that they can, and they did that last year. If you remember, just before the playoffs, they went to South Africa and they played 2 games, and I think they got beat in at least one of them, but they came back with all these messages of we've learned so much and we've learned about playing at altitude, and it worked. So let's reserve judgment for another couple of months on whether or not that Bulls game was season defining.
Yeah, I hope it goes well. And then along the road, you know, who knows? I was at the amazing Stewartry Rugby Club on Friday night at a dinner, and I looked at my phone and I refreshed the page about 25 times because I couldn't believe this. I think I messaged you to check because I couldn't believe the game had ended in a draw. I'm really chuffed that Cammy Scott showed himself to be able to perform in a situation like that, but I would rather he was kicking a goal to win by 15 points and secure the bonus point and all those kind of. It just felt sticky after the silly high of the week before, losing but feeling so positive, to then go to Zebra, and we sat here last week and said this has to be a bonus point win, and it wasn't.
Yeah, and I think if Glasgow's top 2 chances are now hanging by a thread, look, Edinburgh's chances of getting in the playoffs are slim, and I'm thinking being polite. I think they're probably they need 10 points from 2 games, and they've got Connacht, who I think are still just about in the kind of hunt, but probably even more outsiders. And
I think mathematically they can make it, but it would take it would take some of those math things that we learned at school that we never thought we would ever need to use to work out if they could actually do it. I don't think they're getting there. The Ulster game becomes, well, that's not true. The Connacht, their cup finals, everything Edinburgh have got for now until the end of the season is a cup final.
And I suppose the frustration is that like it's been like that for a while now. But you know, there's now no margin for error. If they lose on Saturday, they're out of Europe. They lose the following week, or they don't pick up maximum points. I think that's the key bit. And then it's going to be proper like abacus time for the Ulster game, because I think there'll be an element of Edinburgh have to win with, you know, a bonus point, and they can't allow Ulster to leave with anything. And then there's some other result and look, Sean said at the weekend, I think that he feels it's not entirely in their hands anymore. So,
well, that's true. It's the most Scottish thing ever. You know, we're back to some of those that, having been a football fan as a youngster, Scotland just qualified for World Cups, but then they went out on goal. That they went out, you know, they had to beat them by 2 goals, and they're winning by 2 goals and lose a goal in the 89th minute. All those kind of things. Edinburgh now, like you said, there is no room for error. It has to be win on Saturday against Bath to stay in Europe. That hopefully gives that bounce, almost that Sharks bounce that seemed to fall flat last week, to go into Connacht, go away, which has been a challenge. But if you can win that, you then go into the Ulster game at home. It's going to be packed. I think there's pennies of tickets left for the Ulster game. You know, the support that Edinburgh has received has been incredible this year. Doug Struth himself said sometimes it can be tough being an Edinburgh rugby supporter, but the loyalty and dedication that a lot of Edinburgh supporters have shown, you know, Saturday is going to be an absolute riot against Bath. And these are playing URC teams in Europe doesn't have the draw. I know there's a thin element to this, but playing against a team like Bath, what an amazing opportunity for everybody. And if you're an Edinburgh player with any sort of thought of a Lions trip, go and turn it on in a semi-final against Bath.
The week before the squad's announced, and all eyes, you know, let's not mistake, all eyes this weekend are firmly on the Champions Cup semi-finals. But from our point of view, if Jamie Ritchie, Darcy Graham, Pierre Schumann put their hand up this weekend, all of a sudden, have you given, the coaches that John DL's in that final meeting able to say, well, look, Andy Farrell, look how well they played against the team who are miles, and that's the other thing, like Bath are miles in front of the Premiership. Say what you want about quality of the Premiership and all that stuff, like Bath's squad is so good that they've basically walked that league. They're top of the league by a country mile, and like you'd be doing well to bet against them, I think.
But winning's really, really hard. Anybody can lose. Winning is really, really hard. And Bath are winning. It doesn't matter who they're playing. Like they're winning. They're used to winning. They're finding ways to win. They won big against Newcastle. Newcastle are struggling. Beat Exeter, but they're finding ways to win. They look like they're enjoying it. That if you speak to anybody that knows anything about Bath or has any allegiance to Bath, they're so excited about what's going on. Like they feel like the good times are back. Andy Nichol will be parading himself about this weekend as a Bath man. He'll have his medal with him, and quite rightly so. I was
just going to say, I think you and I would be doing the same if we'd a Champions Cup.
100%.
Cup as it was then.
I just think it's an amazing opportunity for Edinburgh to host it. I'm really chuffed they've left it at the Hive. There's probably a sense to have taken it in, but we just don't have an in-between stadium. You can't go for 7,800 to 67,500 and think it's going to be the same. I love that they've left it where it is. I know the players always want to play at the Hive. It's, whatever that motivation was that they found against the Sharks, where they physically fronted up, Bath are going to be different. But if Edinburgh can dictate the intensity like the physicality they had against Sharks, and then you can get Darcy Graham's hands on the ball, if you can get the way James Lang and Matt Curry are playing, if they can find some space, all of a sudden it's half time and, maybe things are looking all right and the crowd gets excited and the announcer gets excited and everybody starts thinking, right, we're actually on here. We have to keep the belief. We have to stay in touch long enough that there's the belief, because otherwise the energy just gets sucked out of the squad, the stadium, the whole thing.
Are you pleased the game's in the Hive because it means you don't have to shout quite as much?
I'm pleased it's in the Hive because they've finally found a home and they've made it a difficult place to come. Like I remember, I can't remember who it was, but I remember when they played at Murrayfield speaking to an away coach who said playing at Murrayfield for away teams is the dream because there's not much of an atmosphere. It's an international standard pitch. The facilities are great. Like we actually look forward to coming here. Now that's not really what you want to hear for away teams. Now Cocker's made things tough because of the way he set up his team. Yeah. And I think when I first got involved with Edinburgh, I think the only time I saw Cocker's team lose at home was when they lost to Munster. That first season, I think they won everything at home, and he made it as uncomfortable as possible. But
how many people say that about, we really want to go to Scotstoun because it's big, wide open, expansive pitch, lovely facilities, and that's been part of Glasgow's success. They've made for years now, for a decade and more, they've made no bones about the fact that, look, Scotstoun isn't perfect, but we can make something out of that. Exactly. Imagine if Edinburgh had said, right, we've got this semi-final. Why don't we hand on a plate Finn Russell, the pitch he probably knows the best of anywhere, and two of his Scotland teammates who are more than comfortable in that environment, plus all the England internationals, plus the Springboks, and it would just have been... I don't think there was another choice.
Am I right in saying Finn Russell's never played at the Hive?
I was going to ask you the same question, but I don't think he will have.
I don't think he's played at the Hive. Now, he's likely, I don't know if Scotland train at the Oriel, but then they only come to Murrayfield to train on the big pitch. So I'm not sure, but I'm not sure he's ever been there.
There was an open training session before the World Cup that I think would have been the only time Finn's sort of experienced it, but that would have been kicking a few balls and nothing sort of substantial at all. Just to go back to what you said very quickly about staying in touch, I worry about that if that's Edinburgh's kind of... I get what you mean, that they have to be on the scoreboard, they have to be close enough that there's a bit of belief, because I think that was, when there was that kind of Sam Skinner-Etzebeth spat in the Sharks game, you could feel that people actually believed Edinburgh might win that. Not that anybody, I think, thought Sam Skinner was going to win the scrap with Etzebeth, but...
I did. My money was on the Skins.
I mean, it's money probably lost, but looking at Bath's game from the weekend, I know it was like a much, much changed team, and we've talked about Newcastle. They're obviously struggling. It was close at one point. Then Bath scored tries 56, 59, and... Sorry, 50, 56, 59, 60. Ignore that. 50, 56, 59. Game over. 21 points in 10 minutes, and all of a sudden it's just... And they've got that ability. They did it the week before against Exeter as well. I think they scored 3 in less than that. And that's the worry, is that if you give them half an inch, they'll take 2 miles. They are...
and I think like Ali Price, when he box kicks it has to be on the money. Jamie Ritchie has been outstanding for the last 2 or 3 seasons in the air, competing for that. Magnus Bradbury, I think, is adding that a little bit to his game. The wingers, Darcy loves that opportunity. I'm not sure who's going to be on the other wing, depending on who's fit and how things go. But I just think that box kick is probably even more important than Ross Thompson kicking, because there will probably be more box kicks than there will be Ross Thompson kicks. But we don't want to give Bath anything cheap, like the Sharks. The cheap thing they got was kind of right at the end after 2 or 3, like a chain reaction of things that went wrong. I mean, staying in touch, I'll be interested to see, do they kick for goal? Do they kick to the corner and try and get sevens? Do they think they can front up against that Bath pack? Or are they going to take 3 and then have the ball kicked back to them and have to play out from their 22? There's so many things to this game. They had analysed Sharks and thought they don't get off the floor very, very quickly, so we're going to try and up the tempo. Now, that's all very well saying that if you go into a massive collision. But they did generate quick ball. James Lang and Masesi, I thought, played one of his better games, and they did get quicker ball and they did get it to the width. Bath are not bringing that same threat as the Sharks, so I'm just interested to see. I would love to see Edinburgh impose their game on somebody else. That was my hope, that Edinburgh brought their intensity up to the Sharks, but then it came down to Zebri. Rather than saying to Zebri, you've got to come and live with us, And that's where I would like to see that maturity of the squad with some quite a lot of international players in that squad say, right, you've got to come to us in the way that I think Glasgow have done more consistently over the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's entirely fair. I think, look, if Edinburgh are off it by 2%, never mind anymore, Bath will blow them away. I think, and they can do that so many ways. They can go wide, and Finn can do all the things that Finn does, and they've got great threats out wide. But similarly, they've got a great pack, and they'll have a whole pack almost on the bench waiting to come on, like Johan van Graan's 6-2 almost every week. So, and I think they were 7-1 a couple of weeks ago. So, look, I think they'll come for Edinburgh up front. I think they've just got a ridiculous. We could talk about them all day. They've just got a ridiculous array of talent, and I think it's Edinburgh massive underdogs. But what a chance! You're one game away from a final for the first time in 10 years. You're at home. Like, if this game was at the Rec, we'd all be saying, like,
it would definitely have a different feel. It would massively have a different feel. The opportunity to bring them to the Hive, the psychology around it. Bath are in such rude health. They've got such a strong squad to pick from. They're safe with league. They want, to do a double. I know it's not the big cup, but you win what's in front of you. So they can come fully loaded, even if they picked up 2 injuries at the weekend. They're still in rude health. They're not like Glasgow and Edinburgh are at the moment, nursing a team full of injuries, or a team that's unavailable to play rather than a team full of injuries. That makes it sound like the boys that are playing are injured. What I mean is the number of injuries. So Bath just feel like they are there to go and win everything that's in front of them. But we still have this belief that Edinburgh have got it in them to get a result. And, the number of people that say, I'll take a 1 pointer, it's not going to be 6-3. It's not going to be 17-10. I think Edinburgh are looking at having to score 3 and 4 tries to beat Bath.
Yeah, I think speaking to a few people earlier, I think the assumption is Bath will score points. So to your point earlier, taking threes, actually just throw that out the window, because, it might do you good for 10, 15 minutes, but you're not going to get 15 points in threes. Like, they're not that type of team. They don't give away barrel loads of penalties. So Edinburgh are going to have to score tries, which means they've got to get James Lang and Matt Curry on the ball. They've got to get Wes Houston and Darcy Graham involved. And that then means Ali Price isn't doing the box kicking all the time. So it was such an interesting kind of first 10, 15 minutes to see how Edinburgh go about it. But again, as I say, it's a great opportunity. They'll not say this, but I think they've almost got nothing to lose. There's no expectation, I don't think, that Edinburgh get to the final against a team that's got Finn and everybody else. Just as a point on Finn.
It's a cup final.
Yeah, it is a cup final.
Ross, it's Orlando.
It is Orlando, but there was a guy who played at the weekend, Kieran Donoghue, and he was superb. So they've got options, but
Orlando Bailey's a player.
Yeah, he is a player.
So Ross, there is there. I think the other thing, Ross, is, of course, Finn Russell in whatever team he plays is probably the best player in the team. But Bath are so strong. Like Will Stewart, if we were talking about the Lions in January, nobody was talking about Will Stewart being a British Lion. And then 6 weeks later, all of a sudden, Will Stewart's first choice test prop for, so Bath have got so many players, and it's tough to get into an international team. You look at some of those players in that Bath team, Josh Bayliss is a favourite of yours, Gav. You talk about Josh Bayliss all the time. I didn't watch enough Premiership to really know how good he is. He can't really get in the Scotland back row, but he's playing for Bath every week for, not even 8 minutes, because sometimes there's 6 forwards on the bench. So the depth that Bath have, even if they decided Finn wasn't playing or stubbed his toe or somebody slipped him some dodgy chicken on Friday night that he didn't have to play, or we go past the hotel and people with horns all night, I still think they'll be all right if Finn's not playing. And when you look at the Cam Redpath, Max Ojomo is what a rugby player. They've got Rudy McConaughey, who I really hoped is going to be Scottish. There's so much depth there, and Ben Spencer playing at scrum half, I think he is so good he makes Finn even better.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think Finn is.
And he's not a regular international. Like we're talking, that he's an outstanding scrum half who isn't first choice for England.
Just looking very quickly there, I think you're right. Ted Hill's another one who I think is an exceptional Premiership player, but can't seem to make that regular step up. And just a quick look at the games Finn's lost this season. So Bristol in the league, South Africa for Scotland, La Rochelle in the Champions Cup, Northampton, Leinster, and then apart from that, Six Nations games. Finn hasn't lost a game since he went back to Bath after the Six Nations. So like Edinburgh would be the outlier. If you add Edinburgh to that list, Edinburgh, La Rochelle, Leinster, like Edinburgh, the outliers. So I think that probably shows where the sort of two teams are at. But look, as you say, like we've got this kind of local bias that Edinburgh might have it in them, and I really, really hope they do. I hope they make it a good contest and a great occasion, because it's a semi-final and it would be massive for them if they can get there.
I cannot wait to see how this unfolds. I can't wait to see Finn's demeanour. I can't wait to see the way he plays. But it's not all about Finn, and Edinburgh won't make it all about Finn because they're not that naive. I would imagine Jamie Ritchie will say hello to him and give him a tickle. If Hamish Watson's playing, if Maggie gets a chance to run at him, I think he'd enjoy that. If Langer gets a chance to put a hit on, I think he'll quite enjoy. Like Finn's not necessarily got a target on his back, but any team you play against that has a great 10 is going to get some attention. I just hope that our big players, Darcy, Matt Curry, James Lang, Jamie Ritchie, Pierre Schumann, I just hope they can show themselves. Like if Pierre gets to go up against Will Stewart with the Lions selection 4 days away, like go for it. Like, here's your last chance to stake a claim. And that's what it is for, Jamie Ritchie, do you want to be a Lion? Right, Jamie, Saturday against Bath, it's your last audition. Darcy, go for it. I just think it's an incredible opportunity. They've worked to get, and it's a full house, 7,774, I think, is the capacity. Everybody's there. They're putting out a flag for everybody. There's going to be a sea orange. If they can start and keep that noise and that intensity in the Hive, they've got every chance.
But yeah, and you're 100%. You talked about Liverpool earlier, so I feel like I can go back to my football knowledge. Like last night, I watched PSG play Arsenal, and the noise before kickoff was incredible.
Yeah, amazing. And then 4 minutes later,
4 minutes later, and the whole thing unravelled in the 4th minute because it was so flat. And the worst thing as a home supporter you can hear in the stadium is nothing but the away support. I know it's different. There's not that in the kind of sections in rugby, but like it all just felt like somebody had put a pin in the balloon and it was all done. And I think like Edinburgh can't have that. And if it does dip, somebody that's not the stadium announcer needs to pick that up. It's
if the injuries keep going, we might be needing a new stadium announcer, because I might need to put my boots on.
Or I think they might just replace the players and keep you on the announcing.
Yeah,
a wild idea, but who knows?
I think it's an amazing occasion. It's great that they're in that situation, that a team like Bath, with the current rock star of rugby coming up, Bath are flying. We didn't get that many opportunities. As I said at the start, I find it hard to get excited about playing against the teams you play in the league in Europe, where you really want a bit of variation. You want a bit of, but we've not got a huge amount between France and England. That's the only variation we've got, unless Cockers gets his way and we get them in.
Yeah, no, totally. It's going to be a great occasion. I'm looking forward to it for many reasons. I think let's hope the weather's like this as well. But I've not seen the forecast, but if it's howling,
I would be saying to you, get the Factor 50 packed, big fella.
Great. I've got it looked out. I had to nip out for 30 seconds earlier, so I put the Factor 50 on then.
Yeah.
I'll have it on again on Saturday. I'm maybe a wee top up at half time.
Mummy, why is that big guy wearing such a big coat? Why is he got a balaclava on? That's Gav, sweetheart. That's Gav. He's an X-ray. Listen, talking of the Hive, I wasn't there. My good lady was running the London Marathon on Sunday, so we were in London Village at the weekend. I tell you what, that was some hot conditions. She did incredibly well to get over the finish line, but I missed Scotland women. I'm not sure I saw that coming. The way Ireland were building up to it, I thought it was tough to see a win with the last play of the game. Is a refreshing change, being a Scottish supporter of pretty much any sport.
And over Ireland, it was almost, I couldn't believe my eyes.
And it just, the lift that the players, when you saw the way the players celebrated when Fran scored the try, and then for Nelly to kick the goal, I thought was class, because that's one that you could have just down tools, right? Doesn't matter. For her to kick the goal, I thought was a great touch. Frustrating that the Italian game was so disjointed, but a massive lift to finish on, before a World Cup prep.
Yeah, totally. And I think they've got to, if you look, I'm not saying Ireland beat New Zealand and Scotland have beaten Ireland, so Scotland can beat New Zealand. That doesn't what I mean. What's your word for that?
Scottish football were world champions in 1967.
Yes, indeed. Look, they've got to take the confidence from that away into, the next time they get together, which might be not that long, before the World Cup. I think it's tough when you finish a campaign, and Gregor Townsend always says this, when you finish a campaign on a poor performance, you are frustrated, you're disappointed, because you don't have that next game to kind of put it right. And I'm really pleased that after taking a bit of a hiding at Welford Road, Scotland actually did put that right at the weekend. And I think there's enough in that performance, there's enough in the individuals now that you say, well, look, it's there's positives to take there going into World Cup warm-ups, and like they've got injuries as well, if they can get a couple of players back, Holly Cunningham and Merrill would make a big difference. Whether they'll make it or not for the World Cup I'm not sure, but yeah, I think great to end on a positive note, and certainly all the noise coming out of the camp post-match has been encouraging, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I think the Holly Cunningham one, to bring that depth, Was is now back doing more training. It's still a race for her. So Holly Cunningham, I don't know the extent to her injury, but her being back and available. Merrill brings competition in that middle of the field, because at the moment there isn't really. You're going to play Helen Nelson for the majority of the game unless it's gone either way. You're going to do the same with Tomo and the same with Emma Orr. You're not taking off unless she's injured. She plays 80 minutes. So you're then, we spoke about this with Scotland during the Six Nations in a similar way about having people on the bench that you're probably not going to use. Mm-hmm. So you have Evie Wills on the bench, but you're unlikely going to use Evie unless there's an injury. The back three is a little bit different. If Corinne Grant comes back in, there's a bit more depth there, but the scrum half, there's a little bit of depth. I think you're right. I think if they can get 2 or 3 back, all of a sudden they go into the World Cup feeling, really, really strong. And the front rows totally stood up. The depth and the prop certainly has stood up with Anne Young showing herself. Leah Bartlett's been and Eliane Clark has now become, she's a stick-on tight head where maybe there wasn't the trust in her last year.
Yeah, and I think when you look at, if you rewind 5 years, Christine Belial was playing games in the second row or the back row, and they basically said to her, look.
Well, remember when Jade was a prop?
Yeah, exactly. You could have feasibly at one point had a Scotland pack that had Jade and Rachel Malcolm in the front row, Hannah Smith at one time in the back row. They tried that, and just people, the best players in the team somewhere, because that you had to get the best 15 on the pitch. Now through Celtic Challenge and all that kind of, Edinburgh Uni and all, there's much more of a pathway to actually get props in the front row and hookers in the middle of the front row and second rows, and rather than shoehorning people into a position that we think they might be able to do because of a physical characteristic. So
how good is Sarah Bonner? I mean, a moment of absolute genius, and she pokes so much fun at herself, but just class. And like the back row now, like having Jade in the second row alongside Bonds I thought was decent. And the way Rachel McLachlan, she's like Darcy, doesn't realise how big she is, the way she plays. Evie Gallagher, I was really chuffed to see her being nominated for Team of the Championship. Sorry, I thought she was phenomenal. I think she's relentless. The way she puts her body into places, the way all back rows should, and then having Rachel back as leader. She wasn't on the pitch last week. That wasn't going to make much of a difference, I don't think, against England. But having her back just brings so much to the party. That back row, having Jade on, Sarah Bonner playing well and taking on even more responsibility. There's a lot to be really excited about.
Yeah, there is, and I think that's why it's good that they, for the players, it's good that they finished on a high. For Brian Easton and the coaches, it's good. But for the general sort of atmosphere around women's rugby in Scotland, it's a positive thing, because now you can actually justifiably talk them up a bit going into the World Cup, and it's not all doom and gloom. They're not going to make the quarterfinals. I still think Scotland have got a massive chance at making a World Cup quarterfinal. And how often have we said that, men's or women's, in the last 5, 6, 7 years?
A lot of them you speak to and they'll say semi-final. Like, that's target. Like, let's go after a semi-final. And if they can get there in full health, everybody back, Brian gets to pick the strongest squad that he possibly can pick. I know they're doing the review and getting ready for planning before the coaches and management team get some time off. So I know they're still going through things just now, but it's massively exciting, and to have it on our doorstep. The last one being in New Zealand just felt really, really far away and difficult times and people getting up during the night. This one to be front and centre. Hopefully it's in the news, it's in the bulletins, it's all over social media. There's a huge opportunity for them.
Totally, yeah. I mean, couldn't agree anymore. But I suppose we've digressed onto the Scotland women's game without talking too much about your trip to London. How did Mrs. Happiness's Egg Shape get on?
Do you know, it was a world record for the number of finishers, 55,000. We saw her about 9 miles, looking pretty good. Thought we were going to see her again, but crowds and roads closed. And I mean, London, I love the place, but geez, it was all over it. And then went on to Tower Bridge, amazing, not to see Nikki run. And then we saw her at Big Ben when she was about 2 miles away from the finish line. It was baking hot. It was amazing. And she came across the finish line on the mile, just amazing, absolutely incredible. Raised a chunk of change for the My Name is Doddy Foundation. I thought I was going to bump into people that I knew, but there was just so many people there. It just didn't happen. But it's an incredible thing. I think it's a once in a lifetime. I can't see us being back. But amazing thing to do.
You mean to say you won't be running it next year?
Nah, I reckon go somewhere else. We've been to London. We've done that. I reckon let's go somewhere else.
There's a challenge there, I'm sure. I can feel it. There's something in the pipeline.
Do you know what makes me laugh? Like Nikki doing it, amazing. I've had people message me saying, "Your wife's totally inspired me. I've signed up for a London Marathon." It's like all those things when you see them on the TV, you think, "Oh, this isn't that bad. I could do that." And then I've been running one marathon in my life. I can tell you, the struggle is real. So my mate Sean, I think you maybe know, helps me with a podcast from Fill Your Boots. Big handsome Sean into the ballot for the London Marathon next year. And I'd love him to get in to do it. It would be a big deal. Yeah, amazing, incredible thing. Really, really proud. It was outstanding.
Brilliant. Yeah, I take my hat off to anybody that can run full stop, but run a marathon. And in that heat, I would have been a puddle of suntan lotion by the end of the first mile.
It's also the timing of it. You've trained through the winter, and then you run when the weather's changed. Like that gave me a real fright at Edinburgh. I was training when the wee one was at swimming, so I was training at 6 o'clock in the morning in the winter in Edinburgh, and then ran the Edinburgh Marathon on the hottest day of the year. So that was that was a struggle. Anyway, thank you for asking. It's very kind of you. I think we're done. I'll see you at the Hive.
I will see you on Saturday.
Yeah, before we go, one last word from our sponsor. The Scotland Rugby News was brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then now you can go over to S1 Jobs and upload your CV. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs, so you can go and start your search right now. See you in the sunshine, fella.
I might not be in the sunshine, but everybody else will. We enjoy the rest of your week.
You too. Cheers, pal.